CUNY schools cannot afford to do that. And we feel that that is really an unfair bias. In addition, many, a number, not many, but a number of our medical schools have been told by hospitals, we have been offered funds from the for-profit offshore schools, and if you would like to send your students here, you pay as well.
I wonder if we have any listeners who've come through the offshore medical schools and want to weigh in on this at all. 212-433-WNYC. We only have a few minutes, but maybe we can get one doctor's story here or two. 212-433-9692. Mr. Simon, for people out there not familiar with this whole issue and who might be thinking, well, aren't these Caribbean medical schools for primarily bad students, relatively bad students in the United States who couldn't get into U.S. medical schools, and that's who goes there to try to get some kind of, go in the back door to get a medical education and then come home and practice?
Well, two things. One, if you believe that a standardized test is a good evaluator tool for deciding who is going to become a good doctor, then yes, the U.S. medical school students do better on standardized tests. The top, well, depending on geographic area, which is another issue here, but in general, the students who score the highest on standardized tests have a better chance of getting into U.S. medical school. Doesn't mean they become a better doctor. That's number one. Number two, the money that we give to hospitals goes to the exact same thing that the U.S. medical schools just said they gave them. We provide help for their libraries, we help for their computer systems, we help for continuing medical education. That's where that money goes.
She characterized it as for-profit schools, competing with CUNY and SUNY.
Here is the interesting thing. We actually charge less than any New York medical school. Our tuition is less than any, and by the way, this is not opinion, these are facts that can easily be seen, these are numbers. So our schools charge less, and what's interesting about this is we charge less. We take students who may have gone qualified.
You charge less than the SUNY schools and the CUNY schools, and that includes fees, that includes room and board, that includes books, health care, that includes the cost of having somebody live on one of the islands. I have to disagree with you completely.
Well, all you have to do is look at the AAMC statistics and look at our tuition charge, and you will see that that's correct.
All right. Well,
if you want to just do tuition for tuition, that's one thing. Tuition is a very small part of what happens when you go to medical school.
Let me get a doctor's voice in here. Alex in Nassau County, you're on WNYC. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you? Just wanted to weigh in and kind of bring a point of view from a physician who graduated from one of the Caribbean medical schools. And, I have to speak up in defense of Caribbean medical schools. I think, it's fair to say that they do pay, and those funds do contribute to the hospital existence and function, but also they do allow a path for Caribbean medical students to become physicians, majority of whom practice in New York State and provide care to our residents, and, often in the hospitals that are not desired by U.S. medical school grads.
So, Alex, do you see this as an issue of having enough diverse physicians for the diverse communities in New York?
Well, certainly, there are a lot of nuances, like one of your speakers' guests mentioned, but I think there's definitely a solid role and an important role for Caribbean medical students, and, I'll give you my story. Briefly, I graduated from a Caribbean school in St. Martin, AUC, and I had to go to England to complete my rotations because there was no available slots in New York State, my home state. But, I see now that the schools have more opportunities, their students have greater presence, and a lot of these physicians, when graduated, they stay in New York State, and, their presence, their force, they contribute to the economy and the care.
Well, I think that's true, but I think you also have to look at the percentage of students who actually enter the for-profit schools, and I want to commend this caller because he made it through a for-profit medical school, was able to graduate, and was able to get a residency. And if you look at the current residency statistics, you'll see that a majority of the students who initially register to be matched for a residency do not make it through and cannot become physicians, and they are laden with debt that is truly unbelievable.
So we have
So this
1 minute left in the program. Joe Wiederhorn, take 30 seconds and make it very clear to our listeners what the bottom line issue is here. You want a policy from the state?
Yes, we would like a policy from the state, actually. And our policy is very simple. It has been said over and over that we want to ban the Caribbean medical schools. We do not want to ban the Caribbean medical schools. 50% of the slots here in
What do
New
you
York
want? What do you want? 10 seconds.
What
What do
we
you want?
want is that we want that our schools should be guaranteed that they can have the slots that they need in order to provide the quality medical education that we are
And
known
Mr.
for.
Simon, 30 seconds.
Thank you. Okay, I think I have an easy answer that we could both agree on if that's the problem. We will agree that if a U.S. medical school student wants a slot that an international medical school, that a U.S. medical school student wants a slot that an international medical school student has, we'll give it up. Solves the problem.
And I guess it's before the state education department, right?
That's correct.
Neil.
I also, if I can just mention, what people don't realize is that 65% of the New York State medical school graduates never practice in New York State.
Neil Simon, president
That
of
is not true.
American
I'm sorry,
University
that is not
of
true.
Antigua College of Medicine.
Double AMC statistics.
Joe Wiederhorn, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Associate Medical Schools of New York, still going at it. And thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
WNYC is supported by the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, presenting Brooklyn Designs, a design event for contemporary furnishings from Brooklyn, May 6th through 8th at the Brooklyn Expo Center in Greenpoint. Tickets and more at bklyndesigns.com. NJPAC, Steve Martin and Martin Short in an evening you will forget for the rest of your lives, featuring the Steep Canyon Rangers and Jeff Babco, October 30th at New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark. Tickets go on sale this Friday at 10 a.m.
Today on The Takeaway, an 18-year-old second-generation immigrant talks about using performance to express both her American and her Nigerian identities. That's The Takeaway with John Hockenberry this afternoon at 3 on 93.9 FM, WNYC, and WNYC.org.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM, New York. Just keep listening.
Hi, I'm Arun Venugopal, host of WNYC's Micropolis, and today for Leonard Lopate. On today's show, we'll learn more about the life and the untimely death of Sandra Bland. Then French actress Anna Karina joins us to discuss the new restoration of Jean-Luc Godard's film Band of Outsiders, which she stars in. Plus, Karen Aluwalia treats us to a live performance of her music, which combines Sufi mysticism and Indian vocal traditions, as well as modern influences. And director Rob Reiner joins us to discuss his latest film, Being Charlie, inspired by his son's struggles with drug addiction. That's what's coming up after the news. This is WNYC and WNYC.org. Stick around.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Food and Drug Administration is out with long-awaited rules that mandate electronic cigarettes be regulated in the same manner as traditional tobacco products, and manufacturers will be required to seek federal approval to continue marketing all e-cigarette brands that came on the market in the last 9 years. They have long branded e-cigarettes as a safer alternative to traditional tobacco products, but there's been no scientific consensus on the pros and cons of the products. Many manufacturers fear that they will be financially unable to comply with the FDA's new rules and will be forced out of business. The GOP's apparent presidential nominee, Donald Trump, is proposing more economic policies today as he prepares for the next leg of the battle for the White House. Today, the billionaire businessman offered a plan that he says will simplify the U.S. tax code and offer breaks to corporations. In an interview with CNBC, Trump said lowering taxes significantly and doing away with some regulations will spur faster economic growth and job creation. Meanwhile, the Rolling Stones have issued a statement asking Trump to stop using the band's music. NPR's Andrew Limbong reports Trump had been using hits of theirs such as Start Me Up.
This is from Donald Trump's post-Indiana primary win on Tuesday.
Please welcome the next president of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump.
This wasn't the first time he's used a Rolling Stones song this election cycle, but Mick, Keith, and company would like him to stop. In a statement, the band said, quote, "The Rolling Stones have never given permission to the Trump campaign to use their songs and have requested that they cease all use immediately." They're not the first band to ask the de facto nominee to stop using their music. They're joined by acts including Aerosmith, R.E.M., and Adele. Andrew Limbong, NPR News.
We turn now to Turkey, where the prime minister is stepping down. That confirms President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as that country's most powerful politician. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports that Turkey's ruling party is expected to hold an extraordinary Congress on May 22nd.
Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu told ruling AK party officials he will not stand for leader later this month. Heard here through an interpreter, he says he accomplished much despite ending his 4-year term after just 20 months in office.
We thought that it would be a 4-year link between you and us. Unfortunately, it had to be shorter than 4 years.
As a practical matter, analysts say changing the prime minister isn't a radical shakeup because Erdogan has effectively assumed executive powers despite the limits in the current constitution. Erdogan is pressing parliament to approve changes to the constitution to enshrine executive powers in the presidency. Peter Kenyon, NPR News, Istanbul.
U.S. stocks are trading higher. The Dow is up 67 points at 17,718. This is NPR.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Richard Hake. A second official at the Brooklyn office of the Board of Elections will be suspended. As WNYC's Bridget Bergen reports, it's the latest fallout stemming from a massive voter purge before primary day.
The Board of Elections has suspended Betty Ann Canizio, the deputy clerk in the Brooklyn office, without pay, pending an investigation. She's a protege of the Brooklyn Democratic Party boss, Frank Seddio. The move comes nearly 2 weeks after the board also suspended the chief clerk, a Republican appointee. WNYC has reported that 126,000 voters were dropped from the rolls leading up to April's presidential primary. The vote was also marred by widespread reports of irregularities. For WNYC, I'm Bridget Bergen.
And when WNYC contacted Canizio, she had no further comment. New York is trying to crack down on contraband and weapons in state prisons. Governor Cuomo announced that the state is putting more than $1 million into new scanners in state prisons. The portable devices are used for full body scans of inmates and can screen mail, laundry, and mattresses. New York City officials say daily bike riding in New York City has increased 320% since 1990. The Department of Transportation released new statistics from a community health survey today, showing that more than 750,000 New Yorkers ride a bike regularly. Cycling to work has grown twice as fast in New York City as in other major cities. The number of bike commuters in Brooklyn has grown more than any other borough. Coastal areas of New York and New Jersey are under a flood advisory tonight. Higher than usual tides are expected. The National Weather Service says the advisory starts at 6 tonight until midnight. This is WNYC.
Support for NPR comes from Yari Films, presenting Papa, Hemingway in Cuba, from the producer of Crash, starring Giovanni Ribisi, based on a true story about a journalist who ventures to Havana and befriends Ernest Hemingway. Papa was filmed in Cuba, now playing.
You're listening to The Leonard Lopate Show on AM 820 and 93.9 WNYC.
Hi, this is Arun Venugopal. I'm sitting in for Leonard today. What happened to Sandra Bland? It's a question that troubled many people since the 28-year-old woman was found hanged in a Houston jail cell last July. Miss Bland's death occurred just 3 days after she was stopped by a Texas state trooper for failing to signal a lane change, and that gave rise to murder charges, conspiracy theories, and fueled a national debate over the treatment of African Americans by white law enforcement officers. Debbie Nathan has examined the circumstances surrounding Miss Bland's death and takes an in-depth look at her life as well in a story just published in The Nation. Nathan is an award-winning journalist, editor, and translator, and is the author of 4 books. I'm pleased that she can join us in our studio today. Hi.
Hi, thank you.
Debbie, there have been a lot of people who have died in police encounters, a lot of African Americans. Frankly, it's hard to keep track. Why do we continue to talk about Sandra Bland?
I think mainly because she came out of the world like a comet, because there are no other victims of brutality that I know of who left this incredibly rich, beautiful record of their lives on social media. She maintained for several months a Facebook page complete with smartphone videos that she would put up about once a week, where she talked about things that were on her mind, and she was just a really charming person. She was a beautiful young woman, and that comes out not only in her image but in her voice and even in her postings, which a lot of times are just kind of funny and smart. And she left herself behind. I don't know how many people would have known her, ironically enough, if she had not died. But once she did die, people went to her page, and I think they were just devastated because they fell in love with her, but she wasn't here anymore. And I think that is what's really made her very unique and very powerful. She is a fully human person.
Let's talk a little about the circumstances of her death. It's been almost a year since she died. Remind us, if you could, how she ended up in jail, and just as a result of a routine traffic stop, she ended up dead.
She had just come out of her alma mater's campus, which is in a little town in Texas. It's a black town. And she made a lane change without signaling, and she was stopped by a state trooper. And I kind of think of her in a way as maybe the Emmett Till of the epoch for down there, because she had Illinois license plates on her car when she was stopped. And I don't think that this would have ever happened to her in Illinois. She did not defer to this trooper in the way that Southern women are supposed to defer. And that's my opinion based on having grown up there. She didn't say, "Oh, officer, I'm so sorry," which is really what you're supposed to do. Instead, she was just civil. She wasn't friendly, but she certainly wasn't unfriendly, and she was just civil. And she was just he asked her what was wrong, and she didn't seem all deferential and cheerful. And she answered his question, and I think just the fact that she told him she was a little irritated but go on and do his job, he took offense at that. He made this snarky demand on her that was not a lawful demand. He just made this demand in a nasty tone of voice that she put her cigarette out, and then he asked her, she asked him, "Why do I have to do that?" And all of a sudden he went from about 0 to 100, and she followed him, and it turned into a very, very, very angry altercation. And of course he had the upper hand and threatened her with a taser and pulled her out of the car, and by the time it was over, she had scratches and bruises on her back. He shoved her to the ground, and he arrested her and charged her with felony assault on a public official.
Now, the video of that confrontation between Ms. Bland and Brian T. Encinia, he's the Texas State Trooper who stopped her, it went viral after it was released. He was placed on administrative duty after her death, and in January he was charged with perjury in connection with the case. How exactly did he perjure himself?
He filled out his form, whatever you need to fill out after you make an arrest, and he said that she had become combative after he lawfully tried to get her out of the car so that he could enforce a safe traffic stop. And so that's what he wrote. And if there had been no video, of course there was his video and then someone else made a video, it's just very clear from these videos that he didn't take her out to enforce a safe traffic stop. As the grand jury said, he took her out because he was just pissed off, which is not professional by any means.
And where do things stand with the indictment?
He was just in court yesterday pleading innocent. And so eventually he will be judged, but right now, he was indicted, and I think he's going to go to trial. He just pleaded innocent.
What are the various charges? Is it just perjury?
He only has that misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor charge, the perjury charge. That's it. He doesn't have any other charges.
Has anybody else been charged in connection with her death?
No other people have been charged.
She was born in 1987. She was raised by her mother, Geneva Reed, along with 4 sisters, so there were 5 of them. Where did she grow up?
She spent her first 9 years on the near west side of Chicago, which was a very beleaguered place by the time she was born. She was actually in the same neighborhood that Alex Kotlowitz wrote about in his book There Are No Children Here. As very poverty-stricken, very violent by the time she was a young child, very segregated, and just a very bad place for children. And so her mother moved out to the suburbs, which was a pretty pioneering move because she went to DuPage County, which is a bordering county where only at the time 4% of the population was black. So she took the kids out to this quiet little suburb.
And you said it was overwhelmingly white high school that she went to?
Yeah, again, it was about 3 or 4% black, and everybody else was not black. Yeah, primarily white.
But one thing that's great about your article in The Nation is you give us a sense of she's an extremely talented girl growing up. She has all these different extracurricular activities she's involved with. Tell me about some of those.
I think I was talking to somebody out there, someone who went through that high school experience, also black, who said that, this is what you do if you're in a situation like that. I mean, what are you going to do? You're either going to try to hide or you're going to try to stick out. And she did the latter, and she was a wonderful student, and she was in the Honor Society, and she joined practically every extracurricular activity and club that there was. She was in the symphony band. She played the trombone. She was a very tall young woman. And so that fit her, that instrument. She was in, I think, student government, and she was in, like, the Model UN, and she was in this club and that club, and athletics and basketball, and, the Foreign Language Honor Society. I mean, you just couldn't even count them on two hands.
So she has great promise. And eventually she decides to go to college down in Texas.
She was a very bright young woman, obviously a very ambitious young woman. I think that her family encouraged that greatly. And she went to, I believe, a college recruiting fair, and she was very taken by the idea of going to a historically black college university, an HBCU, which is what Prairie View University or Prairie View A&M is. It's a college in Texas. And Prairie View happens to be kind of the pioneer developer of the drum line and the black marching band, which is like an incredible phenomenon with really amazing showmanship and amazing music. And there was a band professor who had come in and decided that he really wanted to make this the champion band. So he started a scholarship program, and she got in on that trombone, on her trombone, into a music scholarship program with that band.
And you said it's incredibly rigorous. It was like, there's almost something kind of like military-like.
Well, it was like she joined the musical Marines because, this particular band leader,
into the kind of healthy dialogue. That's yet another reason why we at universities, when we have this opportunity, have a real responsibility to try to draw people out of that and say, look, we need to have a larger conversation here. I also think that can be oversaid or overemphasized. I mean, these kinds of platforms have also enabled people in some cases to be able to share differing views. I mean, I have friends across the political spectrum on my Facebook page. They disagree sharply on certain issues, and sometimes that can be a healthy exercise of free speech.
Professor Landy?
Yeah, I finally have something really cheerful to say, which is that the vast bulk of college students that at least the ones that I deal with, are remarkably open-minded. And this furor has really been created, I think, by, first of all, relatively small groups of activist students who do not represent the modal student, and more insidiously, the proliferation of a bureaucracy on our campuses. Their careers depend on their ability to be very active in controlling speech. They're there initially to deal with hate speech, but of course there isn't that much hate speech on a lot of these campuses, so they look to expand their portfolio. There's too much administration on our campuses and not enough freedom.
You think there's a speech police on campus who are responsible for hate speech and use of inappropriate racial language?
Yes. There's a bureaucracy whose professional advancement depends on really finding cases to deal with, and so they expand their portfolios, and I dare say they often inspire students to create issues that would, in the normal course of things, would never arise.
Professor Corvino?
Once again, I worry that might be overstated. I mean, certainly there are people who expand the notion of hate speech way too far, that anything, that makes them uncomfortable or they disagree with suddenly becomes hate speech. There are thin-skinned people in every element of society. But I also think that, some of what we're referring to here as pushback, as criticism, is yet a further example of people exercising their free speech. When people say things that are insensitive, that marginalize people on campuses, and other people call that out, that's a healthy exercise of free speech as well.
John Corvino is professor and chair of the philosophy department at Wayne State University. Mark Landy is professor of political science at Boston College. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, John.
This is Salita in Girdwood, Alaska. I attended Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. Both the student body and most of the city of Cincinnati definitely tended toward conservative, Christian, right-wing, and Republican, and I am none of those things. However, I always felt that my opinions were not only welcomed, but also encouraged and respected by faculty and students. Productive and thoughtful dialogue, and sometimes robust debate, were the values that really enriched the educational experience and kept it lively and valuable.
McKinney, Texas shared, I went to an incredibly conservative university, but because of the way I was raised and the confidence I had in my own beliefs, I never felt I had to censor or hide my opinions about things. It actually brought people forward who were in agreement but hadn't felt comfortable sharing. Call us at 8778-MY-TAKE or comment at thetakeaway.org. Later this hour, America's hidden history told in awkward parent-teacher conferences. 18-year-old Machi Demoriaku had a 91 average when she brought her parents in for conference.
It was still highly embarrassing because I'm African and I'm Nigerian, and Nigerian parents do a lot of annoying, embarrassing stuff.
Machi is making a career out of telling her first-generation Nigerian-American stories, and a lot of the stories involve her very traditional parents.
They're very strong, proud people, that they have like this certain tradition that they go by, and it stays the same. Like, there's no way in changing it.
So you don't like that about it?
I love it, and then there's some times where I kind of disengage myself from it. So today I'm like picking colleges for performing arts, and my aunt and uncle will go ahead and tell my dad or my mom, like, this gal is not doing what is good for herself, what is good for everybody else, and that kind of like gets me upset because I want to do what's good for me.
First Generation America and its teenage declarations of independence. That's coming up here on The Takeaway.
Supporting WHYY, the Villanova Executive MBA is a 21-month program designed for experienced professionals ready to take their career to the next level. With a rigorous academic program and a collaborative peer learning environment, students may learn lessons that can be immediately applied to the business environment. On May 12th, the Villanova Executive MBA presents An Evening with the Villanova EMBA, an information session featuring alumni, faculty, and staff who will share their Villanova Executive MBA experience. Details at mba.villanova.edu.
It's 12:20 on WHYY. This summer, WHYY offers emerging journalists and filmmakers in high school the opportunity to build their portfolios, gain real-world experience, and work closely with WHYY staff. Registration is open for June and August sessions. Simply visit whyy.org/summer for more information on these summer programs. Rest of the day, you're looking at a high of 57. It's 52 on WHYY.
You're listening to The Takeaway from WNYC and PRI Public Radio International, in collaboration with the New York Times and WGBH Boston Public Radio.
Turkey's President Recep Erdogan is maybe throwing in the towel on a decade of trying to become a regional power. Erdogan has forced his hand-picked Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu, to stand down later this month. The Syrian migrant crisis, an escalating conflict with PKK Kurdish rebels, as well as a perceived failure to have any influence over events in the Syrian civil war, have all brought a chapter of Turkish history to a close. Soner Çayaptay is director of the Turkish research program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Soner, is this an ideological conflict that Erdogan is having?
Not at all. I think this shows personalization of power in Turkey, a very unfortunate trend in one of the oldest democracies in the Middle East, and for that purpose, a country which has been a multi-party democracy since 1950. I think is now seeing the hollowing out of all institutions and personalization of power in the hands of Turkish President Erdogan. Davutoğlu was seen as a very compliant prime minister. You could not be more compliant than him, but I think it looks like Erdogan wants someone who's basically a no-name and will do everything that he wants as head of government, that is head of prime minister, completely subservient to Erdogan, who's head of state. This shows to me that Erdogan is not only the head of state in Turkey, which is his official title, but he's also the head of government now de facto. He will handpick the next head of the ruling party as well as the next head of government. So he's head of state, head of government, head of ruling party, head of everything in Turkey. Complete personalization of power in his hands seems to be on the way.
And given that the prime minister was seen as someone who was compliant, and even that didn't work out, does he have a constituency? Is he well known in the country? Is he likely to take his dismissal and make some sort of political opposition out of it?
Unfortunately for himself, the prime minister has no constituency whatsoever. He is an academic who is basically seen as someone with some scholarly credentials who came to power as a foreign policy expert. He's actually the architect of Turkey's failed Syria policy, but ironically, that policy was backed up by Erdogan when Davutoğlu, the prime minister, executed it. So I think another way of looking at